Well, I think what I wanted to talk about today are a couple of things. One, we focus a lot on the customer experience, and we should think about the backdrop that marketing presents for the new customer experience. And I think marketing is very interesting because two things are changing. One, we're getting lots more data on our customers. And the second piece is that we're using that data, that behavioral data, to actually understand how our customers behave rather than actually asking them how they're going to behave. And we frequently see this attitude behavior gap. And what we can now do as marketers is get beyond that problem, because we can actually see the behaviors that manifest, that appear, rather than relying on asking our consumers, what may you do with us in the future? I think why that's also very interesting is we're starting to see that customers, consumers, react to that information, that behavioral data being generated. And so we have this very dynamic sort of feedback loop that as we as organizations try and provide the best customer experience, and what the word best means is an interesting question, we start to see that actually our customers react to that, they generate different data, and we then have to amend that customer experience based on that new data. So this very dynamic, and some may say very messy system, requires us to think very differently about how we develop the customer experience. There are lots of things that we discussed in terms of how the digitalized or the data-driven customer experience is evolving. And those are probably quite predictable, to be honest, in terms of understanding how our customers move from one device to another device, from one service to another service, as they move from online to offline and online again. The role of emotion that's coming into it now in terms of the interface between technology and the customer is no longer purely about performance. It can now be about an emotional response. We're seeing that actually the technology is moving to a point now that if I'm very frustrated with a company, that level of frustration, or maybe delight, but it's more frequently frustration to be honest, is now starting to be recognized by the technology that's being used in the customer experience interface. What that doesn't really talk about, though, is where humans fit into all of this. And I think something which is quite counterintuitive is that the human touch, human interaction in the customer experience is possibly becoming even more important as that customer experience becomes more datafied and more digitalized. We've just finished a large piece of research with GfK in the UK that shows that actually, as you make, in this particular case, the marcoms, the advertising part of the customer experience, more and more personalized, you get to a certain point where the customer really doesn't like this experience at all. And that has huge impacts for business, because you may lose the customer at this point. And what we don't yet know, or certainly what we're just starting to explore, is what do you have to do to get that customer back? Now, two things come out of those results that are very interesting. Firstly, we noticed that actually as customers start to realize the data, the behavioral data that we generate, and we all generate huge quantities of this data now, quite often without us even realizing. As customers start to realize that data can be used to predict what we may do, we potentially start to try and manipulate our own data. We try and basically throw the marketers off our scent, that we want to be more individualistic, we want to be more spontaneous. Now, if we think about that very dynamic model for customer experience, where actually our experience is increasingly driven by the data we collect from our customers, it's a cautionary tale for marketers to maybe not be so reliant on the data. There is a temptation that we think that the data tells us everything we need to know, but increasingly the view is that actually not only do we need humans in that relationship with our customer, but of course we need humans to look beyond the data and apply what we could describe as practical wisdom. In other words, wisdom that is driven not just by what the hard numbers tell us, but by the context around it. The second piece we see from our new research is that even though customers don't like it when marketers get too close to them, when they get too personal, one very effective way to remove that negative effect is to bring humans back into the process. It seems that when you give the customer the end of the customer experience and humans are involved, actually they become a lot more comfortable with the level of personalization. So that's one argument to say we should be very careful thinking about an over-reliance on data and digital, but actually humans are very, very important too. But the other piece that I wanted to mention today was not only is the human piece crucial for what the customer wants, but if we become as marketers too reliant on the data, we start potentially seeing the customer experience as a problem that just needs to be solved. And increasingly you see the conversation around this problem can be solved by making the process as efficient as possible. And there are many situations where efficiency does not equate to a good customer experience, that some friction, some decisions that our consumers have to make may ultimately generate a far better customer experience, that actually from touch point to touch point, we may think that actually, or may find quite counterintuitively, that making customer experience a little more complex, maybe even a little more challenging in a good way for the customer, actually generates a far better customer experience over the whole of the customer journey. It says basically, to be an engineer is not enough to be an engineer. And what that means, and I think it applies beautifully to the increasingly datafied customer experience, is that we cannot rely just on manuals and instruction books and data sets to deliver a better experience for our customers. At the end of the day, we need to understand the social context of the fabric within which our customers are interacting with us. And it's only that human element, that human touch, that will deliver the best customer experience. I think that what we tend to see generally is an over-fascination with the latest opportunity. I think that's human nature. And to go back a long time, when we only had radio stations, when television came along, the only thing they could put on television were radio shows. So you had shots of people standing around a microphone delivering a program. When colour television came along, everyone obsessed about getting as much colour into the program as possible. We tend to fixate on what's now available. I think we see that in marketing, that the pendulum has swung a lot towards the data and the digital part of the conversation. And now we're just starting to see the swing back, that actually human interaction is incredibly important. I'm not saying that we return to the sort of the data poor, data dry era. I think it's a case of humanizing the data, and I think that's where we'll go. That actually we think beyond the data set and think, what does this really mean for our customers? Our customers are humans. And even though we'd like to think that our customers are only thinking about us when they interact with us as a company, the truth is they're not. So I think humanizing the data means thinking more broadly, thinking about what our customers just done, what they're about to do, what are the rival or competing or even complementary forces that are going on, which our data set may not capture. And I think also it's about human use of the data. But actually I think we increasingly see that the difference between a more traditional human-led approach and a completely automated sort of data-driven approach will obviously merge. And you'll see that actually it's far more seamless in terms of actually how I may use data about you to improve the experience you have. But I do think we'll also see this move away from specific touch, like a mentality that looks at touch point after touch point after touch point. And we'll see companies apply what we can call systems thinking. It's messy and complex, but actually we'll realize that actually that generates a far better customer experience if you think about the entire journey and how actually you can change specific touch points. I think that's where we'll go.